Stand by for mode 1, Charlie 17. Mark, mode 1, Charlie.
And the flight dynamics officer says we look good on all sources, right on the trajectory. Crew will experience maximum G-forces of about 4 Gs at shutdown. Coming up on first stage shutdown. I think we saw them all from here.
Roger, Jack. The thrust is going, all 5 up there. Running good. Roger, 17, here, go.
Greetings and welcome to Refuge Depot, and we are happy to have you here. As you can see on the screen, we're going to be talking about a very serious topic. Could the loss of family farms lead to famine in America? And we have a very special guest on, and I'll go ahead and introduce him. Brian Reisinger grew up on a family farm in Sauk County, Wisconsin, and lives to tell the hidden stories of rural America. An award-winning journalist, rural policy expert, speaker, and consultant, Brian worked with his dad on the farm from the time he could walk. His book, Land Rich, Cash Poor, tells the story of the disappearing American farmer, weaving the forgotten history of an issue affecting every dinner table with his own family's four-generation fight for survival. Just named a C.S. Author Series 2024 Most Important Book. The hidden history of an economic and cultural crisis that is threatening our very food supply. The disappearance of the American farmer. Critically acclaimed with praise from across the political spectrum. Land Rich, Cash Poor, 272 pages, reveals the urgent, unflinching truth. Learn more and purchase the book at brian-reisinger.com. All right, and greetings. And what we want to ask you to do before we get started, that notice that Refuge Depot, what we try to do is bring you current events and news and information on ways that you can survive in this turbulent world, not only with the climate crisis, but also with some civil unrest, if you will. So there's a lot of things that are going on. And so we want you to tune in, learn how to shelter in place, begin to store non-perishable food and water in your home, but also prepare you a bug out bag just in case you need to evacuate your area. So all of these things we want you to learn, so tune in. And if you're looking for a different perspective on today's news, then make sure that you like this video, subscribe, and follow our channel. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest today. And let me go ahead and do it. Greetings, Mr. Brian Reisinger. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on. First of all, I know that we had maybe a few hiccups getting you on in the beginning, but we finally got here, and we always want to thank our better half for allowing you to come on to the program.
Well, I'm grateful for your patience with me, and we had some mishaps, but I'm so glad we made this work because I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Myself as well. So I've written a few books. So let's go ahead and start with, to sit down and to write a book, you really have to be passionate about the subject. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what motivated you to write the book.
You know, you're so right. You got to hope that you've happened upon an idea that is powerful enough to take you through that process, because there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of hurdles that are put in place. And, you know, that's even once you've figured out a path to getting it published. You know, I mean, it's such a, you know, challenging process, but a rewarding process, but you got to have an idea to carry it through. And the idea for my book, I came by it honestly. I can't say that I dreamt it up. I grew up with it. And the idea was, our farms are disappearing, and why is that? And I first came across that idea when I was a little kid. I worked with my dad on our fourth generation farm from the time I could walk. And I knew it was a special way of life. I knew that it was disappearing because the guys would drive into the driveway with a pickup truck and they'd say, you know, this farm sold or that farm went under. So I always knew that I was growing up in a place that was unique and becoming rarer. And but I didn't know why. And as I got older and I pursued a career off the farm and in writing, first in business journals and then in public policy, I began to see that we had an economic system that was leaving farms like the one I grew up on behind. And I wanted to answer the question of why that was. So that's where the book came from. And it's really a book that looks at the hidden errors of history driving the disappearance of our farms, and weaves that with my family's 4-generation story from the Depression to today, which has all kinds of stories of survival and hardship and weather that blesses and threatens and farm accidents, all kinds of things our family went through. And we're not unique. Farm families across the country have been surviving this kind of thing for centuries. Maybe what's a little different about us is that we decided to pick our head up and tell a story. And I'm grateful that my family was willing to be as raw and honest as they were. And we told that story 4 generations, and we traced that along all the huge economic and other forces that were wiping out our way of life. And in the process, to the exact point of your take on this, in the process, challenging our food system. You know, this howling out of rural America impacts every single American dinner table in terms of the damage that it does to our security of our food supply.
Yeah. And you know, I've got so many questions, but I wanted to ask you. So, as I was saying right before we came on, we don't really hear this in the mainstream media. I mean, this is a crisis. This is like you said, and we're going to play a clip talking about the food security. But this is a crisis. So why don't you think that it is in the mainstream media?
You know, I think the big reason is that so many of the people that are living this story out, they live in what you'd call flyover country. You know, I grew up in southern Wisconsin, the hills of southern Wisconsin, you know, parts of the Midwest, parts of the Great Plains. This is where, I mean, there's farms everywhere and there's good people in all walks of life in all parts of the country. But the reality is that a lot of the way this is playing out has happened in you know, middle of the country, what they call the heartland, what they call flyover country, depending upon, you know, what label you want to give it. But the stories there don't always get their due. And
Hmm.
you combine that with the complex challenges facing farms and the complex issues that relate to how that attaches to our food supply, you can't get people to pay attention in the first place. And when you can, it's hard for them to understand it. And so I tried to answer by telling a story of the human drama of what our family has lived and tie that with these issues in the hope of getting people's attention. I think we've succeeded in doing that to a degree. And I hope that we can continue to do it, because I think when you get people's attention and they hear what our families are living through, and also they hear about the impact it has on every American dinner table, whether you've set foot in a barn or not, I think it's resonating with people. But it is undertold. The media doesn't necessarily realize what's going on.
Hmm. And so the loss of family farms can have a devastating effect on any country, um, especially in the United States. What are some of the, um, I guess, what are some of the things that the loss of family farms, and not so much the corporate farms, because we know that the corporate farms are out there, but the loss of family farms, what significance is that to America?
Well, here's what's happening. As we lose our family farms, we're depending on fewer and fewer places to provide our food. You know, fewer larger operations, not only farms, but agribusiness companies and food companies and everybody else. So as we lose our farms, we lose that economic diversity that gives us strength. When you've got a wide variety of businesses of all different sizes in any industry providing a good or a service, you've got all kinds of competition, you got all kinds of choices, you got all kinds of options, you have resiliency in the face of disaster, and we're losing the family farms that provide that resilience in the face of disaster. So a perfect example of this, I say perfect, is not a good thing. The seminal example, this is what happened during COVID. Everybody remembers being in the store, not being able to get the food that you needed. And if you could, the price was way higher. And the price of food is still through the roof, partially because of COVID and partially because of similar supply chain crises since. Well, while that was going on, farm families like ours were dealing with having challenges selling their products. So how do you have people in the store not able to get the food they need and farmers over here trying to figure out how to sell their goods? The reason is because the supply chain was locked up. And so what's happened is, as we've lost so many of our family farms and as our supply chain has become dominated by a really highly integrated, highly concentrated industry with, a couple of large players, it has made it so that there are fewer paths for food to get from the farm gate to the dinner table. So you have one great big distribution center go down, that affects our food supply. And it's not just COVID. It's happening right now with bird flu. Why are the price of eggs through the roof? Well, bird flu is wiping out our egg supply. Well, if we had more small farms all over the country where you could buy, yes, from the grocery store or from your national supply chain outlets, but you could also buy eggs more easily locally and regionally, we wouldn't have the supply issues. And so we wouldn't have the food security issues. We wouldn't have the prices going through the roof. And so this is getting worse as we lose our farms each year.
And so if you could, let's just begin. Let's just start right now and let people know to support their local family farms, local farms. And what are some of the steps that you think that people can do to support local farms?
Yeah, the most important.
And let me say this real quick is that when I was growing up, which was quite some time ago, right? But when I was growing up, I remember, as a school trip, going to family farms. I don't know if they do that nowadays, but it was an experience, and I think that we have become so domesticated, that we are really detached from the land. I remember Minister Farrakhan. He said that the first, a lot of people say that the first profession was prostitution, but he says that the first profession was the farmer.
Yeah.
Tilling the land. So talk about that. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but talk about maybe, those field trips to the farm, what type of value that can have for children. And as you were saying, how we can support family local farms.
Yeah, the reality is that we're not just losing the farms that feed us, but we're losing a part of ourselves. The idea that farming is a profession that has really defined in many ways our country. America had a great expanse of land and ample natural resources. And one of the things that has wound into our country from the beginning for people of all walks of life is that at one time we were a largely rural country and so many people were part of agriculture and part of farming. And although that's changing in many ways, it's good that we progressed into developing other industries and all that stuff. Farming and working the land is a big part of who we are. And so we are endangering our food supply. Our food is becoming less secure. It's becoming more expensive. It's becoming less healthy. All these things are tied to the loss of our farms, but we're also losing a part of ourselves. We're losing a part of our identity. And, people, I'm so grateful to have grown up on a farm, and the kids who get to do farm tours, we hosted a lot of those at our farm. You learn about hard work. You learn about the circle of life. You learn about so many things that I think are just so important for us as a country to understand. And as we lose those farms, we endanger our food supply. We lose a source of so many of those important values. And our rural urban divide really grows, the division between people who are from rural areas and urban areas. And that's before you even get into right or left or anything else. It increases our divisions when we have people in parts of the country that don't understand each other. And not understanding what's going on our farms means that a lot of people in farm country feel left behind. There's a lot of frustration and strife around that. And also, people in urban and other areas don't necessarily understand where their food comes from. So they can't make choices that hold our policymakers accountable for doing the right thing. And so we got a lot of policymakers that have no idea what's going on a farm, let alone how it affects our food supply. And so we lose all those things as we lose our farms.
Absolutely. And so let's get a little bit into your book. What prestigious recognitions has the book Land Rich, Cash Poor received for 2024? And I want to say that, you know, the reason why I contacted you is because I'm a C-SPAN junkie, and I saw you on C-SPAN, and I was like, wow, that's powerful. I need to definitely reach out to see if I can have Mr. Reisner on the program. But yeah, let us know a little bit about the.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Well, as you noted earlier, it was named a C-SPAN 2024 Author Series Most Important Book. I was honored to be part of that lineup. They selected books on a range of topics from a range of perspectives, and I was so grateful that, to our earlier conversation about national media not paying attention to these stories, that national outlets have seen that this is a story that needs to be spotlighted and told. The Associated Press and other outlets have given it positive reviews. The Associated Press called it an anthem to the family farm in America, which I was grateful for. And, you know, we've had people from the right and the left and everywhere in between, Farm Journal Foundation, all kinds of other places, recognize the value of the story that we're trying to tell. Maybe the most important review I have to say is from my dad. And, you know, we talk about my dad, who's third generation, my sister and I are fourth generation. And, you know, my dad, he started working the farm at the age of 8 when his dad slipped off a corn crib and broke his back. And we tell that story in the book. And my grandpa did get back up on his feet, but my dad never stopped doing the work of a grown man from the age of 8. And he's lived it. And he's an example of the hardship. He's also an example of the beauty. He loves it. It's gotten down to his blood and his bones. And, you know, when he read the book, when he finished it, I was coming in from, I was out in the woods, a little cabin I've got out back with the farmhouse, and I came in and there were tears in his eyes, and he said, "It's the truth." And I don't know if I can ask for a better accolade than that. So I'm grateful that a story that people like my dad, where I'm from, consider it to be a true story, a raw, honest story, and that it can get maybe some heads turning nationally onto these issues at the same time. So that's a gift that I'll always have, that I'm grateful for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that, like you said, that you went to work on the farm when you were young. And, you know, to be a farmer, let's admit it, because, you know, I'll tell you a little bit about my background is that, you know, once my parents split, my father, his people are down south. So he went back down south, and my mother's family, they're the city slickers. So they stayed up north. And so every summer I would go down south and help out on the farm. And, you know, to those who are watching, they'll be surprised that we castrated pigs. He had horses, goats, and things like that. But, you know, to be a farmer, there is within that individual a real passion for farming, and it's not cut out for everybody. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, the people who love it and who live it long enough, it gets down in your blood and your bones, but it's not for everybody. I mean, it's incredibly hard work. I mean, the people that are doing this line of work, I consider it the most noble profession. Not only is it probably correct to say it's one of the earliest, if not the earliest, I think it's the most noble. And the reason is that you're working as close as you possibly can to the earth and to our resources and to animals. And, you know, you're working so hard, the hours are endless. A 12-hour day is kind of a normal thing, and that's if you're not in planting and harvesting season, at which point the hours are sky's the limit. You're facing the elements, you're facing weather that can bless, threaten, you know, and you've got to get the hay crop in or the corn done before the rain comes or the frost comes. So you're battling the elements. You're battling real physical danger. As much as you love the animals, as much as a farmer loves his animals, there's danger there working with large animals, large machinery, tractors, physical labor that can be dangerous. A lot of farm injuries we talk about in the book over the years in terms of just the different physical peril people faced. And then, you know, that's before you even get into the economics of it, you know, and the economics of it, there's constantly rising costs, and what's happening to the prices. They might be going up, they might be going down, but they're rarely keeping pace with the increase in costs. And so when you pile all that up, when you pile up the long hours and the battling the elements and the braving physical danger and the facing of these economic realities, it really is a hard life. At the same time, it's a beautiful life. You know that. I mean, I'm so glad to hear your background and so appreciative of you sharing that. You know,
Yeah.
I woke up with my dad working sun up to sundown, and I got the chance to see him, you know, help a cow deliver a calf, and we would see the first moments of life. You know, I
Yeah.
remember my dad giving one whistle and the cow dog running out to the pasture out back and bringing the cows in the morning through the fog. You know, I mean, just some of the most incredible, beautiful things, and the things that I learned about life and who I am and who we are. Growing up in a place like that, I'll never replace. You know, and so it's
Yeah.
that hardship and that beauty goes hand in hand.
Yeah, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Now, one of the things that is very unfortunate, I think, is that a lot of these family farms, the individuals who are working the farms, they have to work a second job. And the thing about working a second job, and like you said, farm work is not easy. You have to wake up, you have to make sure that if an animal gets sick, there's just a number of things that can take place. And to have to work a second job to get by is absolutely absurd. Can you talk a little bit about that and help the people understand what is going on? Why do they have to work a second job?
You're so right, and you're hitting on a really key issue, which is this is what has happened to our farms in terms of the way that each year they're grinding out a living. It's getting harder and harder. So a lot of our farms have disappeared. We've lost 45,000 farms per year on average for the past century. That's 70% of our farms lost. Now we still have nearly 2 million left, and we've lost so many. And the ones that we're at greatest risk of losing are the medium-sized and the small farms. So that risk is always there. But people are amazed to hear that of the nearly 2 million farms we have left, 88% of them are small farms. And they say, how can that be? And they're right to ask that, because the farms are not, most of them are not able to make a profitable living. Some of them are able to eke it out and they find a way to do it, but it's really, really hard. The way that they're able to keep their farm is they're working 2 or 3 jobs. So you got guys and husbands and wives and women and children, everybody, these whole families, where they're operating a farm and it's side income, it's supplemental income, and they are at the same time working a factory shift, pouring concrete, working on a construction site, working at a local retailer, and farming. And these pictures that you've got here, I mean, they're so great to show them. This is an example of a pretty large piece of machinery, probably for one of the larger farms out there. They're making massive amounts of acreage there. And those are the types of farms that they have a little bit easier time being profitable because they're so large. They've gotten economic scale. So many of our farms have not been able to do that, or they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to become so big. They wanted to be mid-size or small, and they're perfectly efficient. They're hardworking. They're doing everything right. But our economic, political, and technological forces in this country have made it harder and harder for them to make a living, unfortunately. So right now we got nearly 2 million farm families that are holding on by working 2 or 3 jobs. And thank God they're doing it, because they're holding on to their land. They're maintaining that tradition of small land ownership in this country, and they are the hope going forward. If we can reverse the issues that led to the disappearance of our farms, or at least we can slow them down or counteract them, we got nearly 2 million farm families holding on, even though the economics don't work. Imagine what they could accomplish for us and our food supply and our food security if we found a way to make it work again.
And so what central crisis does the book explore regarding the American food supply?
Yeah. So the central crisis is the supply chain crisis. Our food system in some ways is a modern miracle, in the sense that you can have any kind of food you want any time of year, anywhere in the country, right? And that is accomplished by a blend of a lot of the farms that are providing our food being larger farms that are dealing with large companies that can, ship things all over the country and all over the world. And it's a function of a lot of import of food from foreign countries. The problem with that modern miracle is it's gotten to the point with the loss of our farms and with the integration and consolidation of industries that you don't have enough routes from the farm gate to the dinner table. So when you have COVID or when you have bird flu, it's too easy for that supply chain to get disrupted. And at the same time, now the other answer could be, well, people could say, well, we ought to just import our food. Well, that's a recipe for disaster as well, because then we're dependent on other foreign countries for our food. And if we get into a dispute with one of those countries, or there's sanctions, or there's another crisis like COVID that, we don't want to bring food into the country because of concerns about contamination, you really get into trouble. So having this highly integrated industry that can accomplish modern miracles, but also is highly vulnerable to supply chain disruption, and having foreign country imports, those two things are not sustainable solutions for us. What's sustainable is having family farms of all types and sizes being able to not only survive, but thrive, and be able to supply food to our people, where the American people can buy food being shipped around nationally. They can buy it regionally. They can buy it locally. They have more choices and more ways to be able to buy their food. And that's a good thing in general, because it's more choices. And it's also a good thing because, look, at the end of the day, in the middle of disasters, we have seen we don't have the food that we need already. We're getting warning shots of that issue, and we're going to face it more and more. And by the way, the price is going up. It used to be that, the food that you bought off the national supply chain was cheaper than what you get at the local farm market. It's really not quite like that anymore. The price of food has gone up so much because of COVID and bird flu and other issues. These disasters keep on striking. They keep on pushing the price of food up, up, up. So we have to figure out a way to get away from that. And so the central question of the book is, why are our farms disappearing, and what's the crisis it's creating? And that crisis is our supply chain crisis. And
absolutely.
In the book, we try to uncover the hidden reasons that has happened. And again, we weave those with my family's story. And what I found is that the big forces in our country creating this problem are the same forces that families like mine were living on the ground for the past 100 years.
Is it an issue? I'm just going to say it. Is it an issue of greed? Is that where it's at?
It's a great question. I think it's an issue of in part of ignorance. I think greed plays a role, because where there's ignorance, a lot of other forces can come in and come at play. But what I found as we looked at this from the early 1900s on up through to today, the Great Depression, the farm crisis, the 1980s, globalization, all these things, the recessions, the last, more recent decades, all these things, what they had in common is that people didn't realize what was going on the farm and how that was affecting all of us. Now, in that left room for people to, let greed and other, unfortunate motivations direct a lot of what was happening. But it was that ignorance. And so the three big forces that have led to the disappearance of our farms, I'll just summarize them very briefly, are economic crises that we didn't understand, whether it's the Depression or the farm crisis, more modern recessions. We didn't understand how they were affecting the American farmer. The second is governmental decisions, policy decisions under both parties over the last century that made these problems worse. And then technological. And what I mean by that is technology is a double-edged sword. It has led to the advancement of a lot of our American agriculture, but it also has needlessly left many farms behind. We didn't pursue what's called scale-neutral technology that would allow technology to benefit farms of all sizes, not only large, but also mid-sized and small. So through misunderstanding our economic crises, through bad decisions by our government leaders, and through technology needlessly leaving some of our farms behind, we created this compounding crisis where decade after decade we were losing more farms when we didn't have to. There was always going to be some natural consolidation going on in farming, like there is in any industry. But we didn't have to lose 45,000 farms per year for a century. That's for sure.
That's crazy. And let's go ahead, with each, answer, there's just 1,000 more questions that pop up in my head. But I want to play this clip by the speaker that he was talking about before the government was about to shut down. He was talking about the farm bill. Let's look at this clip, and then if I can get your comments on it. Let's see here.
We have $10 billion of emergency aid to our farmers and ranchers. Many of the small farms in America are on the verge of collapse, primarily because of Bidenomics and inflation, the high cost of inputs and fertilizer and seed and everything that they need to keep those farms going. And they've had 3 lost years in a row, some of it because of drought, a lot of it because of the economics of it, and it doesn't make sense for lenders to provide them funding anymore. And so this is a stopgap measure to save those farms, to save food production in America. to ensure that we have that diversity in the marketplace, and our food supply is directly related to national security. So it's a very, very important thing for both parties to do, to provide that aid.
Man, I mean, that there was so much just in that clip. And that, once again, that's one of the things that, we're not being told. I mean, I was surprised that he talked about 3 years of drought that have affected the farmers. Yeah, if you would like to just any piece of that clip, or if you want to talk on multiple things that he said, go right ahead.
Well, one of the issues that we're seeing is that farmers, as it's getting harder and harder to make a living, they are running into those economic challenges, and the government, needs to take steps to be able to do deeper reform of our government programs. And what I mean by that is there's supposed to be a passage of what's called a 5-year farm bill, where you pass a bill that is going to kind of establish the way these government programs are going to work for the next 5 years. And that does a lot of things. It makes sure that the programs that are in place are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that they're properly funded, all that kind of stuff. Whether you like those government programs or not, and we can talk about the role of government and whether those programs are working. I think that's an additional conversation we can have. But whether you like those programs or not, one of the things that happens is agricultural lenders out there who lend money to farmers, they have a very hard time lending if there isn't a farm bill in place, because the farm bill impacts and directs so much of the industry, whether people like the government involvement or not. It directs so much of what goes on in the industry that if there isn't a farm bill, those ag lenders, many of them quite literally can't lend money to farmers because they don't know what the shape of the industry is going to be. And so when you don't have a farm bill getting passed, it gets harder and harder for farmers, not only who are struggling to make a living, but for them to be able to borrow money. And many farmers, not all, but many farmers have to take out an operating loan to be able to, buy seed and other things to be able to plant in the spring. And then what happens is they work through the year, and then as they harvest their crops, they pay that loan off. So farmers have to be able to access loans in many cases to be able to operate. So when we don't have a farm bill, not only do we not know whether these programs are working right and whether they're getting reformed right, but farmers in many cases can't even get a loan to be able to operate. And what we've been having here is we've been having farm bill after farm bill just getting punted down the road. And rather than passing a farm bill that has longer, 5 years and has a deeper work being done on whether these programs are working, they're punting. And so they're passing 1 month, 1 year patches, extensions. What we need is for Congress to roll up their sleeves and actually do the work of hammering out a bill that moves these farm programs in the direction that we want and need, so that we don't have to go month to month, year to year on whether farmers are going to be able to get loans. And we don't have to wonder whether these government programs are working, because a lot of people are steering tax money toward programs thinking they're helping the farmers. And then the farmers are saying, we're not getting the support that we need. And people wonder what's happening. Well, what's happening is that the government programs aren't functioning the way they're supposed to. And over time, they become prone to abuse and favoritism, whether they're doing what they should have in the first place or not. Some of the programs contradict one another. So we need Congress to roll up their sleeves and do some deep reforms of our farm programs with a 5-year farm bill. And that's been something that they've been unable to do for years now.
Man, that's crazy. And so, and when I say crazy, I mean, as for a nation, it's just crazy, because once again, we're going to take a break. I'm going to promote this book that I wrote. It's called The Inescapable Famine, right? And one of the things that when I wrote the book, you've seen these commercials where the person, they're like an actor playing them, and they're out of character, and then they bite into, candy bar. I won't promote the candy bar, but they bite into the candy bar and they become themselves again. Well, one of the things that I did write in this book, that there is a chemical that when you are hungry, it does cause you to be angry, and when we look at a lot of the revolutions that have taken place around the world, what really sparked the revolutions was that the people were hungry. And I think that when he talks about food security, I think that we're not only just talking about the possibility of our food being contaminated. but I think we're also talking about, keeping civil order. So let me play this a promo, and then we'll get right back into our conversation. All right. I have another commercial. I'll play it a little later on as we go. Um, what I wanted to talk about now is that, some of the things that you talked about, and so what we saw in years past over in India, just jump into them for a while. The farmers were struggling. They were really struggling. I guess they couldn't get supplies and things like that. And they were having a lot of farmers commit suicide. Um, can you talk about the mental health of family farms? I mean, I know that they're going through a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the most difficult aspects of this. And I think, that we have a mental health crisis in this country, and people of all walks of life um,
Hmm.
deserve to be able to speak up about the issues that they're facing and get help for them. One of the things that's going on in farming is that it is one of the highest industries as far as suicide rates in the country. It's because it's high stress for all the reasons that we talked about. And it's compounded by the fact that farmers really kind of live a do or die life. You're either getting the crop in time or you're not. You're moving the farm forward this year or you're not, and you're risking it falling. It's really kind of it's all or nothing kind of feeling that they live with, and that builds generation after generation. Great grandpa, escaped pre-World War One Europe to farm. Grandpa got the farm through the depression. Mom and dad got the farm through the farm crisis. Why can't I make it? Is kind of the feeling that you have. And you're fighting not just for your job, but your home, your community, your heritage, because the farm is all those things to a farm family. And we have personal experience with that issue. In the opening pages of the book, and then a theme that we come back to in it, we tell the story of my dad. I'm grateful that my dad is still farming. My sister's working to take the farm over, and I'm honored to tell our story. But my dad, um, he faced a point in history where we had to sell our herd of dairy cows, and for 100 years, our family had milked cows in the hills of southern Wisconsin, and we decided that we were going to have to get way bigger, move from 50 cows to hundreds or thousands of cows to be able to make it. And so we could do that, or we could diversify. And some families decide to get bigger. Some decide to try to do something else. So we diversified, and we decided we were going to raise heifers for other dairy cows, for other dairy farms. We were going to raise beef for consumers, and we were going to cash crop. And we were able to sell the herd and do this in time to save our land and to try to find a path forward. But selling your herd, it's like a death in the family. And my dad was really questioning his purpose. And, I discovered through the course of the book and talking to him that he'd been thinking of hurting himself. And in the opening page of the book, the day after we sold the cows, we were standing on the porch of my cabin out back in the woods, out back of the farmhouse where we both grew up. And I was wondering if he was thinking about that, because we'd heard stories of farmers locally taking their own lives. And I learned through the course of talking to him for the book that he had been thinking about that. And for us to be standing on that porch together, and me wondering if he's thinking it and him thinking it, and not realize, we were standing right next to each other, but we were worlds apart. And I'm grateful that my dad was able to come through that. He talked about how he was feeling to a degree with our family. We had help from the Farmer Angel Network, which is an organization that helps prevent farmer suicide. He thought ultimately about his grandkids, the next generation, the thing that has gotten every farm family through it. And I'm grateful to say that he moved forward, and he's doing well now. But we saw up close and personal that mental health crisis, and we came too close to paying the ultimate price. And so we tell that story in the book. And I tell it, and we decided to tell it because we think it's important that people know that they're not alone out there, and there's strength, not shame, in speaking up.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that is important to let people know that they're not alone, and that they're the struggle, as they say, the struggle is real. Um, let's go into you talked a little bit about technology. Is it a double-edged sword? And can you talk a little bit about, let me see here. I think I had a question when it came down to I forget the exact phrase of it, but John Deere, and the struggle that farmers are having with, I think, the right to repair, I think is something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So to your broader point on technology, what's
Hmm.
been going on is that for a long time there was a need for farm technology to help farms take on more acres and more animals with fewer people breaking their backs to do it. And that was part
Hmm.
of what made it so that our country didn't have to have everyone growing their own food. Although it's good to have some self-reliance, we were able to move on and have other people in the economy doing other things. And it's part of what allowed farms that were facing tough economic times to be able to innovate and be able to survive. But it got to a point where we had such a focus on technology that made farms get bigger and bigger. We didn't have enough, we lost our focus on what's called that scale neutral technology. And that's a
Hmm.
technology that a farm of any size can find affordable to buy. My dad would call it penciling out. If I buy this piece of technology or this piece of machinery that upgrades my farm operation, how many years before that kind of pays it for itself in terms of the efficiency,
Hmm.
and less technology over the last several decades of the 20th century was scale neutral. So you had technology that had one time been advancing all farms was suddenly leaving many farms behind. And a lot of these farms were perfectly efficient, hardworking, good operations, ran tight as ship, and they were being left behind because they couldn't adopt the new
Hmm.
forms of technological innovation. And so that's a real problem, and it's something that's been
Hmm.
needlessly wiping out farms. Now, on a related note to your point, the issue of right to repair, what's been happening is that the machinery has been getting so large and so sophisticated that, it goes, I mean, look, a farmer, for decades, farmers have been able to work on their own machinery. A farmer is not just a farmer. He's an electrician, he's a plumber, he's a mechanic, he's a carpenter. I mean, the
Hmm.
skills that you have as a farmer are incredible. But when you get technology that's so large and so sophisticated, incredibly sophisticated computer operations, electronics that really only people who've designed them can work on them, that
Hmm.
gets really, really difficult. And so what's been happening is there's been frustration. And so people in the farming community have been saying, hey, we need to be able to work on this machinery. We need the information, we need the tools, we need the knowledge to be able to work on these machines when they're not just machines, but they're technological monstrosities as well.
Right.
So now some farmers and organizations have taken the route of suing to get what they need. Other organizations like the American Farm Bureau Federation have worked out agreements with equipment dealers, equipment manufacturers to be able to find ways for the farming industry to be able to access what it needs to be able to keep that technology going. And so there's different solutions to the problem that are being
Hmm.
worked through, and we'll see what makes the most sense. But at the end of the day, technology leaving our farms behind doesn't serve anybody
Right.
because the more farms we lose, it's less of a food supply for all of us, but it's also fewer customers for the equipment manufacturers and everybody else. So we need to find a way to have technology be a sustainable thing that helps farms of all sizes, not just creates pressure for farms to get bigger or get out.
Hmm. And so, man, I mean, the problem or the issue, once again, I think that if the American people, the American people, it really knew and understood. I think that this whole situation is being kept in the dark, and for whatever reason, some might think it's nefarious, and some might just may think that it's just neglect. But regardless to why, I mean, it's really putting the American people in a position to where one day is going to be a total shock. And I don't think that it's going to be a shock to where you're happily surprised, but it's going to be a shock to where they're going to ask the question, why? Why weren't we informed so that we could do a rally cry and help the family farmer?
Yeah.
Let's go a little bit into now land. Where I'm from, I see a lot of farmland being converted into solar, converted into apartments, homes. Talk a little bit about what's going on with the land of the family farms.
Yeah, America has a great tradition of small individual land ownership, entrepreneurship, people owning a piece of property and seeing what they could do with it. And as our farms disappear, we're losing that. And there's kind of a cause and effect part of it. Some of the causes, it's all these issues that we talked about. I talked about economic crises and governmental decisions and technological issues. Part of those economic crises have been, we've not only not understood the crisis hitting, but we've not understood the effect of development pressure and other things. And farmers live, the title of the book is Land Rich, Cash Poor, because farmers live in this dilemma where the cash poor part is it's getting harder and harder to grind out a living on that land. The land rich part is the fact that that land is worth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But no farm family wants to sell it if they can help it, because you're selling your home, your community, your heritage, as well as
History, generations.
yeah. But there's that pressure. And so a lot of development pressure. So a lot of farms have given way toward urban development and things like that over the years because of that land rich, cash poor dilemma. And so we've seen farms disappear simply by going bankrupt. We've seen farms disappear by being bought up by other farms. We've seen farms disappear by being bought up by other economic interests, whether it's airports or, cityscapes or houses, residential, whatever the case may be. Now, there's another threat that I think is pretty alarming, and it touches on, I think, a lot of the issues that your listeners and you are always exploring, which is foreign adversaries buying up American farmland. China owns more than 300,000 acres of land, and it's actually the amount of land owned by foreign interests, farmland owned by foreign interest, has increased by 15% in just 2 years. And so now there are people who will say it's still a small percentage, and that's true. But how quickly it's increasing is a really alarming rate that's got people from all walks of life very concerned about it. And in the case of China, they're buying up farmland close to military installations. So what's happening here is, as we lose our small family farms, we are finding that our very farmland that provides our domestic food supply is getting captured by foreign adversaries, and they're doing that near military installations. And the reason it's getting worse, one of the reasons it's getting worse, is because we're losing these small family farms. When you have farmland owned by one large company that maybe only cares about whether they can get a return for their shareholders, it's much easier for a foreign adversary like China to come in and make a deal to buy up a big chunk of land. But if they had to go do that, going farm to farm, walking up on the porches of guys like my dad trying to buy their farmland, I mean, good luck, So small individual entrepreneurship and farm ownership is a guard really against a massive national security threat.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked up, and like you said, Canada owns some land, Australia, the Netherlands, China. Now, why are these stretches of land being sold to foreign countries? I don't even understand that. I mean, I can understand, I guess. Yeah, but I just don't understand. Can you explain that?
It's a great question. So there are some agricultural industries where they will tell you that being able to get friendly foreign investors involved is helpful if they're trying to find investment in their industry, and they're able to work with a Canada or a European country that is an ally, or wherever the country may be. If it's an ally, if it's a friendly interest, there are some farms and industry sectors that want to invite that investment. Other farmers would never dream of selling any land to a foreign country of any kind. But so that's why some of it happens with friendly countries. The really alarming thing is that it happens with foreign adversaries as well. And a lot of the reason for that is many times these foreign adversaries are doing that through all kinds of different shell companies. It's not always clear who exactly the buyer is. So there's some confusion about it. And then in other cases, farmland is owned by organizations that just don't care. Now, your average family farmer is never going to sell to China if they realize that's what's going on. but sometimes they don't realize that's what's going on. And sometimes the land is owned by companies that only care about what kind of return they're going to get. You know, how much money can they make their shareholders if they sell that land? So that's why as you have more and more farmland held not by small family farmers, but by large corporate interests, it gets easier and easier for foreign adversaries to come in and buy that land.
Mm. So along with these foreign investors, I also did some on some individuals in America that own land. Bill Gates being one of the largest. I mean, he's got 275,000 acres of farmland across 17 states. The Stuart and Linda Resnick. And I think that one of the issues with the California wildfires were that they were talking about the water that I guess that the Resnicks control. But that's something that I don't know too much about. There's John Malone, Ted Turner, and an individual named Stan Kronicki, I think. So what are your thoughts as far as these billionaires owning so much plots of land, and what do you think that they're doing with this land that they own?
Well, I'll tell you, the most valuable thing they could do with it is to turn around and figure out how can we incubate more small family farms, more individual entrepreneurship. If there was someone wealthy who wanted to buy up all this farmland out of bankruptcy or from farms that couldn't make it, and they want to turn around and say, hey, you know, I want to sell this land to worthy entrepreneurs who want to try to do something new with the land, that would be incredible. It's an incredible opportunity for someone with that kind of money to help turn back the clock on the crisis of our disappearing farms. I don't know how many of them are planning to do that. I don't know if any of them are planning to do that.
Right.
And the concern is if people are buying up this farmland and they're really just holding it, say, for tax benefits or to own it and have other people, you know, kind of making them money on the sweat of their brow. I think that's just too bad. I mean, the best thing that could happen is for us to have the rebirth of small family farms, new types of farms, farming
Absolutely.
new types of crops and products, and, you know, meeting the needs of an American public that wants to know where their food comes from more than ever. That would be a real service to our country. But I don't know if that's where they're headed or not. So
Right. How does Trump's immigration policy, now that Trump is in office, how does his immigration policy impact farms and the food supply? Because I know that, like you said, when COVID hit, that power, not only did the supply chain was it disrupted, but because you had to have that 6 feet distance and, you know, just things like that, it really impacted the labor on these farms. So what are your thoughts as far as that?
yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to speak to it, and I'll try to be straightforward about it because I know we've only got a couple minutes left. But
Yeah.
you could go into political issues impacting farms forever. What I'll say about it in short is that, you know, immigration is an example of an issue where farmers are really caught in a lot of really difficult cross currents, and it's hard to put farmers into any individual political box as a result of that. I always try to give nonpartisan, at this point in my life and career, nonpartisan input on how things are affecting family farms, whatever direction people might be coming from politically. I just try to provide real information. And
Hmm.
the reality of the situation is that there are a lot of farmers in rural America who would like to see, you know, a secure border, and then there are people on both sides of the political spectrum that support that goal. At the
Hmm.
same time, farmers are also dependent. About half of our farm labor in America is immigrant labor. And
Hmm.
so if there is a sudden shift that means that a lot of that workforce is going to vanish, it's a real challenge. Now,
Hmm.
a lot of our smaller family farms don't use immigrant labor. It's the family operating the farm. A lot of the farms that do have immigrant labor, you still got the farmers who are doing a lot of the work as well alongside of their employees. But in any case, as you get into larger farms and organizations, dairy farms that are really big, as you get into really large fruit and vegetable operations where there's a lot of hand-picked crops, the reality of the situation is that if that workforce suddenly vanishes, if we don't have a way to solve the immigration crisis that includes having a workforce there for agriculture, you're going to see farms that can't operate because they don't have labor. If they are able to find labor, it's going to be far more expensive. And so what's going to happen is if farms aren't able to operate, the food's going to become more scarce and more expensive. If farms are able to operate because they find a solution, but they aren't able to have as affordable of a workforce as they once had, then you're going to have higher prices too. So these issues, you can address the issue of our immigration crisis and secure the border and do it while figuring out a way to make sure that American agriculture has the workforce that it needs. But if you don't do that and you let that workforce vanish, that causes real problems for our food security and for the cost of our food as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I just have two more questions. I have more than two more questions because I would love to talk about this bird flu, but we may, if you have time, we may have to get back into that conversation. But I just wanted to know about the genetically modified seeds. This is something that a lot of people may not know about. Can you talk a little bit about these genetically modified seeds and how that affects the farmers? And if they put these seeds in their ground, how does that work? Is this something where the pharmaceutical or whatever industry controls these seeds? Do they then control to some degree the farm?
Yeah, modern science is an incredible thing, and it does some amazing things, it does some scary things, and this is one of those things that can go both ways. If you have instances where companies are making seed that is so specific only to them and has a few specific traits, and they go too far with that, you could have a scenario where, let's say, a lot of our seed is really narrowed down to a few genetic traits, and suddenly there's an invasive pest or something that is able to disrupt that type of seed. We could suddenly have shortages and real problems. And so it's not good for the direction that our seed is going to be held in too few hands and to be narrowed down to being too narrowly manipulated. On the other hand, there is a lot of new technology that can benefit us. It can make seed that leads to crops that are more resilient. They don't have to be unnatural. They don't have to be bad for us. It can be good things. There's a trait, there's a practice called gene editing. And that sounds kind of science fiction-y, like it's cloning Dolly the sheep, but it's actually a little more simple than that. What it's doing is it's taking existing DNA and making adjustments to that DNA to make crops be able to be grown in more places, in more times a year, in more climates naturally. And so if there's a way that we can harness the good from science, we could create opportunities, new entrepreneur opportunity for more farms to be able to grow more types of crops, more times of year. And it could improve our food security. It can improve our food availability. It could bring the price of food down, all kinds of things. But, science is one of those things that we have to make sure we have open, honest, clear debates about what's working and what isn't, and what's good advancement and what's kind of scary advancement. We got to have those honest conversations to sort that out.
Absolutely. So I guess the last question would be, of course, is what's going on in Mr. Brian Resnick's life as far as the book tour? How can people contact you? And can you give us your website? And I also put that in the chat for people if they want to click and get your book.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Well, we are traveling the country talking about these issues and telling the story, my family story in the book, all over the country. Land Rich Cash Poor is available on Amazon and anywhere else you buy books online. It's also available in bookstores across the country. They'll have it, or they can order it for you. And I can be found at www.brian-reisinger.com. That's Brian, Brian -Reisinger, REISINGER.com. I'm also on X at Brian J. Reisinger. So BRIAN, J as in James, Reisinger, REISINGER. And so whether you find me on my website, whether you find me on X, wherever you get the book, I just appreciate anybody who wants to keep this conversation going and help us address these issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I really appreciate, you coming on. As I said, there's 1,000 more questions. However, as we always say, get the book. Get the book.
Well, I appreciate that so much. And I'd love to
Yeah.
dive into any issues with you as well in the future. It's a great thing you're doing, raising awareness of these things. So
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. And so I'll go ahead and close this on out. I want to thank you once again for coming on to the program and helping us to understand this very serious issue. And for once again, like I said, when we look at the revolutions that break out around the world, um, that food is tied to all of those revolts. I think the Arab revolt started with a young man who couldn't sell his produce and set himself on fire, and from all that, all hell broke loose. So yeah, thank you for thank you for coming on, and may God continue to bless you and your family.
thank you so much. Same to you. I really appreciate it.
All right. And so I want to thank all of you for tuning in. And you can check out in the description, we put a link where you can get Mr. Reisner's book. Also, check out my book on the Inescapable Famine. Many of the things that we just spoke about when it comes down to the food supply. We're looking at the supply chain disruption. Now we're looking at bird flu, and they just found some more farms where they have to cull the chickens. And then what they said is that because of the killing of thousands, possibly millions of these chickens, the price of eggs are going up. So now think of all the products that are produced with eggs. So now you got a disaster that's taking place. So famine is not only that you may not have food, but famine is also where you may not be able to afford the food that you get. So if there is any type of war that breaks out, that's going to inflate the food. So I would definitely suggest that you check out the book. It goes into also the history of famine, and the different ways that famine has taken place. And all of those ways that famine has taken place throughout history are now hitting America. You're also looking at extreme weather. You're looking at drought. You're looking at so many different things. However, all hope is not lost, right? Because it also talks about supporting. And this is why it was so important to have Mr. Reisner on to talk about to talk about family farms, because as he was saying, if there is some type of issue with the food supply, guess where the food will come from. And believe it or not, when you buy food and eat food from your area, because you're in that area, guess what it does? Many people may not even understand that it has an impact on your immune system. So if there's something that's going around in the community and you eat honey from that area, it will help you to boost your immune system. So there's so many things to check out in that book. And I'm going to play a promo of the book, and also a promo from my other book called Immunity Empowerment. And so we won't get into what happens if there's another pandemic, because we were heavily censored when we talked about certain things, right? So, but what we're going to say though is that you definitely need to begin to take your immune system seriously. The body that you have is the temple, the real temple of God, and you have to begin to take care of it and boost your immune system so that if anything breaks out, you have a greater chance of survival. So I'm going to play these ads, and I want to thank you all for watching. Once again, like, subscribe, and follow us across all of the social media platforms. And may God continue to bless you and your family. And I'll go ahead and start off with immunity empowerment. Let's see here. This one is it. Oh no, that's just for the commercial here. Let me play
Are you
this.
ready to take control of your health and empower your immune system? Introducing Immunity Empowerment, a comprehensive guide to understanding and enhancing your immune system. For those looking for a holistic method to boost the immune system, Immunity Empowerment is the book for you. Empower your immune system today. Get your copy of Immunity Empowerment and start your journey to better health. Available now, get the softback at Amazon or the ebook with hot links to references and resources at Amazon, Gumroad, and Patreon.
The Inescapable Famine, Anarchy, Armageddon, and Separation. Unveiling the truth about America's food crisis. Are you prepared for the looming food crisis in America? The Inescapable Famine equips individuals and communities with practical strategies for preparation and empowerment. Empowers through advocacy for community gardens and food cooperatives. It explores the biblical perspective of famine through the stories of Lazarus and the prodigal son. Get your copy today at refugedepot.com, Amazon, or Gumroad.
All right.